What's up everybody, welcome back. So we're almost done with all the boring widget stuff and we can start doing some more fun gaming stuff. But we need to wrap up a few more things. So in this video we're going to create a HUD widget and we're also going to create a pause menu. We're going to have a look at spawning in the players and we're also going to have a look at a new class which is the PlayerState, and we're going to look at how we can use that to transfer information. So again, we have enough to do, so let's get started right away. So first let's have a look at spawning. I want to make sure we can assign a spawn spot to a player, and we're also going to synchronize spawning, so we're actually spawning in at the same time and we start playing at the same time. So let's get the viewport up and we're going to add player starts to the level. So we're going to add 4 of them because I'm making a 4-player game. So if you want to have more players, then obviously add more player starts. So I'm going to just add 4 of them in a row over here. And then in the details panel, we can assign tags to them. So if you select one of them, you can assign the player start tag. So I'm going to simply assign 0 to 3. To each one of them, so 0, 1, 2 and 3. And we need to do the same thing in the other level, so I'm gonna try and see if I can copy them. I'm not sure if that will work, so let's save it. And let's do the same thing in the other level. So that actually works, that's nice. And the tags are also assigned. So we have player starts with tags in place. Now let's see how we can use them. So we're going to open up the game mode. So let's go into our shooter game mode, because right now we are not in the menus anymore. So let's open up the full blueprint editor and we're going to add the event handle starting new player in here. So look for handle starting new player. So from here we're going to get the player controller that enters our game. So we're going to cast it to our shooter player controller. And we're going to put this in an array. So we need to create it. So let's promote this to a variable, and that's all of our connected player controllers. So all connected controllers. And that's an array. So yes, we can change it. So get rid of this, and we need to drag in a getter and then add the new player controller to it. So after we did that, we're gonna get our game instance. So get game instance, and we need to cast it to our shooter game instance. So we are the server, so we have some information stored on the game instance, and we're going to get our number of connected players. So get num connected players, and we're going to store this as a variable on our game mode. So this is the number of expected players. And make sure that we set it. And we're also going to get the variable is solo game from the game instance. So get the solo game, and we're going to plug it into a branch over here. So let's first do the true branch. So to make sure this matches up, we're going to drag in our number of expected players and plug it into the true branch and set it to 1. So if we're playing solo, this doesn't always get updated soon enough, and sometimes this will return 0. So to catch that fault, we're gonna set it manually, and then we can simply drag in all of the player controllers, get the only one that's in here because we're playing a solo game, and then we're gonna restart the player from player start. So restart, at player start, I'm sorry. And let me double check. So we need to plug in the player controller into the top pin, and we can get the start spot from the find player start. So that's this one, and in here we can plug in the tag that we entered in the viewport just a few minutes ago. So that's just the index from the array, So that's 0 in this case. And that spawns in the player. So that's for the solo game. And now let's do our multiplayer branch. So first we're going to add a branch in here. And we're going to check if the number of connected player controllers equals the number of expected players. So we're going to drag in the number of expected players equals and get our player controllers array and get the length from here. So if this matches up, then we are ready to start the game. And if not everybody is connected yet, then we're gonna wait. So we are gonna add a small delay in here if this is true. So if everybody is connected, we're gonna wait for something like half a second. And then we're gonna get a for each loop and plug in the all connected players again. And from here we can simply restart at PlayerStart and use the find PlayerStart function. So we're going to paste this over here. The array element returns the player controller, so we can drag it in here. And we can use the actual index from the array as the incoming name, and it will convert it into a string, so that works. And the player controller also needs to be plugged in to the find PlayerStart. So hook them up like this. And that should sync up our spawning, especially if you play in the standalone, then the host usually spawns quite fast and the client doesn't. So let's see if this kind of works. So we're going to play a standalone game and save everything. So this takes a little bit longer. Oh dang it. So I need to actually load in the main menu map, obviously. So that's my bad. Bear with me. So let's host a game quickly. And let's see if we actually spawn in the level and if the spawning is synced up. So use seamless travel this time and start the game. Yeah, that kind of worked. So we're going to work on actually enabling the controls at the same time in a little bit. So for now I'm satisfied. We actually use our start spot, so that's good enough for me. So we're going to continue with the HUD. I'll see you in a sec. So let's create the widget that we're going to use for the HUD. There's not going to be much in here yet. I want to add a little countdown at the start of the game, and we actually need a HUD later, so then we actually have it in place. So let's just get it out of the way. So with the HUD opened, I'm going to add a canvas panel on here, and then we're simply going to add some text. So let's align it to the center of the screen. So something like 150. No, that should be 0, and then this should be 150, and then we can bump it up a little bit. No, that's not really needed, by the way. So I'm just gonna set the alignment to 0.5, size to content, and then let's make this 3. So let's make it a little bit bigger, and then by default I want it to be hidden. So over here, set it to hidden for the visibility. Then I'm going to make it a variable, so this is going to be my text countdown, and on the top right make it a variable, and that's really all we're going to add for now. So compile and then go to the graph. Now I'm going to make this a really simple and lame function, so I'm not going to add any variables or loops. I'm simply going to set it a few times. So I'm going to create a custom event, and that's called GameStartCountdown. So I'm not really sure if we're going to keep this at the end, but for now I just want to add the countdown and have something on here, so that's why I'm going to do it like this. So first we're going to drag in the countdown and set the visibility to visible. And then we're gonna set the text, but first we're gonna add a second delay. So delay 1 second, and then we're gonna set the text to 2. Plug it in here, set it to 2. And you might have guessed it, we're gonna wait another second and then set it to 1. And then another second, and then something like a start game or start round or something like that. So set text. And let me make it something like round 1. I think I'm gonna make this a round based wave game. So let's go for round 1. And then let's keep this on screen for something like 3 seconds. And then we're gonna remove it, or actually just set it to hidden. So set visibility and hide it again. So that's our super awesome countdown. Now let's compile and save it. And let's go into our player controller. So we're gonna show the HUD and we're gonna make some stuff to show the countdown. So go into the framework, and this time we need our shooter player controller. So we're gonna add a function to show the HUD. So let's create a function, UI show in-game HUD. And we created these functions a few times before, so this is simply going to be isValid. Oh, that's my bad. So get the question mark one, and then we're going to create the HUD widget. So create widget if it's not valid, and that should be our in-game HUD. Then we can promote it to a variable. And we can get the player controller, but we are the player controller, so we can get a reference to ourselves. Then we're going to add it to the viewport, but we need to plug in the variable and also plug it into the isValid pin over here, and make sure that we connect this up. So with this function in place, we can go back to the event graph, and we're going to create no, we don't have to do that. We are the local player controller, so we can simply call the event over here. We don't need the server to do it for us. So we can simply drag in our UI, go in-game HUD, and plug it into the branch over here. And that should be good to go. But we added the remove all widgets, by the way. So we need to make sure that we plug that in before we show the HUD, otherwise we're gonna have some issues. So remove all the widgets and then create the HUD. There we go. So now we are gonna add a little helper event in our character. So let's open our character quickly. And we're gonna disable the input as soon as the character gets possessed. And we could try and do it with event begin play, but we need a delay then, because the player controller doesn't always return valid if you just hook it up. And I want to prevent adding a delay for something like this. I want to just disable the controls as soon as the pawn gets possessed. And we have an event on possessed, so we're going to look for the event on possessed. But we have to keep in mind that this only gets executed on the server, as mentioned in the actual explanation as well, by the way. And to disable the input, we need to do it locally. So we're going to create a custom event for that. And this is going to be called something like disable all input. And this is going to be replicated to the owning client again, like we did before a few times. And then from here, we're going to call disable input. And that's a default event or function. And we need to pass on the player controller in the event over here. And then if we are possessed, we're going to cast to our player controller. And we could make this a pure cast. So convert to pure cast. And then we can disable the input. So we can call our disable all input event. So disable all input, this one. And we need to plug in the player controller over here. So this actually returns a controller, and we need to turn it into a player controller to make sure we can hook it in over here. So that's why we need to cast it. So we're going to use this event to disable all the input when the pawn gets possessed. And now we can go back into our player controller. So the shooter player controller. And over here we're going to create an event that's called enable all input. So create a custom event, enable all input. And again, this is replicated to the owning client. So replicate run on owning client. And we're going to enable all input. So enable input. Sorry, I picked some confusing names again. My bad. For the player controller, we can get the control. For the player controller, we can get a reference to ourselves, and for the target, we can get our controlled pawn. So get controlled pawn, and just plug it in like this. And now that we're here, we're also going to create another custom event, and that's called the game start countdown. And again, this is replicated to run on the owning client. And we're going to drag in our HUD widget and call our game start countdown event. Plug it in over here. And now all we need to do is make sure that the server calls all this stuff, so we can go into our game mode right now. Let me see. So get our shooter game mode. And in here we can create a new event. So let's get rid of this stuff. Create a custom event and call this something like level start. So we're going to call this event when the level actually starts. So I'm going to add a tiny delay in here, something like 0.2 should do actually. Then a for each loop and plug in all of my connected players. Then I want to display the game start countdown for all the connected players. So that's the event that we created on the player controller. And then when the loop is done, so this countdown lasts 3 seconds. So we're going to add a delay in here for 3 seconds. And then again, we're going to get the for each loop for all the connected players. And we're going to call our enable all input event. And that will make sure that players can actually move again. So now if we go a little bit higher up in the graph over here, we have the for each loop where we restart at player start. So if this for each loop is completed, we're going to call our level start event. And in the solo game branch, we're going to do the same thing after the restart at player start. So call your level start event. And now this should work. So let's give it a little test. Compile, save everything, and let's launch it in the viewport. Why not? That goes a little bit faster. Oh, that's actually going to cause some problems with the HUD. So we do need to launch it in standalone. So that's the downside of using seamless travel. There are some differences in the setup, and if you want to test properly, you need to test in a standalone game, but that takes a little bit longer. So we have a lobby. Let's search for the lobby. So that's why I created the seamless travel bool in the lobby. So if there are some things that actually can test without seamless travel, then you don't have to bother and you can simply launch it in Pi. So let's see, we're going to start the game. And now I can't move, so that's good. And we have a countdown, and as soon as it says round 1, I actually can move. So that seems to be working. Now let's see if the other player can move as well. He can. So I think we are good to go. So now let's have a look at the player state and how we can use that to transfer information. So I got a little bit ahead of myself. Before we're looking at the player state, I want to create the pause menu. So let's duplicate our main menu, and that's going to be our widget blueprint pause menu. And let's change it a little bit. So we're gonna get rid of the border again, and we can use 3 buttons, so that's fine. But we're gonna change the text. So this is going to be our resume game. And then for the second one, it's going to be back to the main menu. And the last one is going to be quit game, so that's fine. Now let me resize these a little bit. So these are grouped, something like this. So let's make sure we update them over here as well. So this is my button resume game. And then we have the button main menu. And quit game, so that's good. And we can change the actual title, so let's say paused. And that should be good to go for our pause menu. Now we can get rid of the entire graph for now and compile and save it. Now first let's set everything up in the game instance and things like that, and then we're gonna have a look at the graph. So first let's open up our game instance. And in here I'm going to create a function to show the pause menu. So UI show pause menu. And like we did a few times before, this is going to be a similar function. So we are simply going to check if our pause menu is valid or not. And if it's not, we're going to create it. Create widget. And that's our pause menu widget. So we need to get our player controller, and we can store it as a variable. Widget blueprint pause menu. Then we need to add it to the viewport again and make sure that we actually add our variable and connect all the pins up. So plug in the variable in the isValid node as well. And because we are going back into our menus, we're also going to set our input mode. So drag off the player controller and set a UI only input mode. And make sure that we show the mouse cursor. So again, drag off the player controller and show mouse cursor. And set it to true. And that's all we're going to do in here. So let's return. And then we're going to create a second function in our game instance, and that's going to be called a toggle pause game. So we can simply call this function and it's going to pause and unpause the game. So like this. And we're going to give this a result as well, and that's the isGamePaused result. So isGamePaused result. And let's add some stuff in here. So let me check. First of all, we're going to check if this is a solo game or not. So in multiplayer, we're not actually able to pause the game, but we can still show the pause menu. So if it's a solo game, let's do this first. So we're going to check if the game is paused or not. So we can get actually something like get game paused. Oh, really? Oh, is game paused. So there it is game paused. And we can plug that into a branch. So if it's not paused, then we're gonna set it to paused. So set game paused and make sure that we set it. And we're gonna create a local variable. So local is game paused. And we're gonna set that over here and plug it in. Now for the other branch, we are gonna set it to false and plug it in over here. And let's also make sure we plug this in. Now we are gonna grab our pause menu widget over here and remove it from parent. So this needs to go in the top branch. And then we need to set the input mode again. So set input mode game only. So we are returning back to the game. And we need to get our player controller. And we want to hide the mouse cursor again. So set show mouse cursor. And set that back to false. And then let me double check. We need to create another event, so we're gonna wait here a little bit. First, let's do the other branch. So let me see, over here we need a second event, so we're gonna get back to this later. Let's create a boolean in our game instance, and we're gonna call this multiplayer is PauseMenu visible. Is PauseMenu visible. So if we're playing multiplayer, then we can actually check if we have the pause menu on game, because we cannot use the pause boolean obviously. So let's drag that in over here. And first let's set it. So let's drag into setters, plug them in over here, set this one to true. And then we're just gonna set this to true as well, although the game is not really paused. And now we can plug this top one into the top branch over here, into the remove all parent. And for the rest we need to create two functions. So let's go into our shooter player controller. And let's create an unhide pause menu function in here. So we're simply gonna create a custom event and call it unhide pause menu. That's not really accurate. We're going to call that unhide in-game HUD. I'm sorry, I was kind of baffled there for a second. So, and then we're gonna drag in our in-game HUD over here and set the visibility and set it to visible. And let me see, the other thing that we want to do is call our UI show pause menu in here. So we can simply drag in the function and we can plug it in over here. And we can do the same thing for our other branch. So let me double check so I'm not messing up. I'm getting a little bit confused over here. Forgive me. So that should work in the same fashion. Let's just do it like this and then plug these into the return node. And then plug in our local is game paused over here. So that should work. So I'm sorry, I got a little bit confused over here, but I think we got it all done. So over here we can simply call our show pause menu and we want to move it from the parent over here. That's what we did. And now we need to call our show HUD function again to make sure that the HUD returns on the screen. So that's what we need to do over here in the top branch. And to make sure that we can actually call the function, we need to cast it to our shooter player controller. And then call our unhide in-game HUD. So now we are back on track. There we go. So compile and save this. And let me see. So let's create an action mapping so we can actually pause the game. So let's go into our project settings. Go into the inputs and add another action mapping. Call this pause game. And that's the escape button for me. and close it down, it will save automatically. So now let's go into our character and add the input event for that. So we can look for the pause game event that we just created the input for. At least we should be able to. Event pause game, there we go. And from here we're going to get our game instance. So get game instance. So this is an input event, so this happens locally, and the game instance also exists for the local player, so that's good. So we can cast to our game instance, and then from here we can toggle our pause menu. So we can simply call our toggle function, and then with a branch we can check if we are actually paused or not. So add a branch in here and plug it in. And now we want to get our HUD reference, but we don't have it yet. So let's get an event begin play in here. And we actually created the HUD on the player controller, so we're just gonna get a reference to that. And because we have a 3-second countdown at the beginning of the game, we can safely add a delay of something like 2 seconds in here. That doesn't really matter. And that way we know the HUD is actually created and the pawn is actually pressed. So now we can add a branch in here and check if we are locally controlled. And if we are locally controlled, then we're going to get our player controller. And we need to cast it to our shooter player controller. And then we have the reference to our HUD on here, so we can simply get it and store it on the character. So get in-game HUD and promote it to a variable. And now we can access it from the character as well. So now we can go back to our pause game function, and we're gonna drag in our in-game HUD over here. And when the game is paused, we're gonna set the HUD to hidden. So we're gonna simply set the visibility and set it to hidden and plug it in over here. So you could do the false branch as well, but there's a downside because we set the input mode to UI only, so you cannot use the escape button to unpause the game. You need to use the little click button in the pause menu. I'm not sure how to get around that yet, but if I figure it out, I will get back to you. So for now we could simply copy and paste this and set this back to visible, but at this point we're not really using this branch. So that's out of the way. Now all we need to do is set up the buttons in the pause menu, and we do need to make sure that we plug in the game instance over here to get rid of the error. So there we go. Now let's open up the pause menu widget that we created, and we're gonna set up the buttons in here. So that's not too much work, I think. So first of all, let's do the resume game button. So that's not really a hard one. We're gonna get an on-clicked event in here and get the game instance. And we need to cast it to our shooter game instance. And then we can simply call the toggle function that we created. So toggle paused game. And that's all we need to do. So for the main menu and the quit game buttons, we need to make sure that we destroy the client sessions if we are the server. So that's the same thing we did as we did in the lobby. So we might as well just get the lobby menu in here. And we can copy most of this stuff. So if we look at the main menu button over here, we can just copy all of this. And let's go to the button main menu in the pause menu and paste it over here. And now I don't think we need to change anything, so let me double check. So there's one thing we need to change actually. So if we unpause the game, over here we don't really need the delay. Well, let's just keep the delay, let's keep it safe. And then we're gonna get our game instance. So really get game instance, and we need to cast it to our shooter game instance over here. And we want to make sure that we set our is PauseMenu visible back to false. So that's the MP PauseMenu visible, and set it back to false. Otherwise, if we start a new game, then the booleans don't match up anymore. So then we can simply hook it back up to the destroy session, and we can open the main menu. So that's good. So we have the main menu button done, and for the quit game button we can do something similar. So we can get an onClicked event in here, and again I'm just gonna copy all of the stuff and paste it from the lobby game mode. So I'm just gonna paste it again, and in here, instead of opening the level, we're gonna get rid of this node and we're gonna call our quit game event. So quit game. And that's all we need to do. And over here for the server we can do the same thing. So instead of opening the level, we're gonna quit the game. And that's good to go. So compile and save. And we should have a working pause menu right now. So let's see. So it's launching on the other monitor. There we go. It's taking its sweet time. So let's join the session. Let's enable server travel and let's see what happens. So all of this is still working. We have something of a countdown and we have a pause menu in here. I can resume the game. So let me see, client, that's also working. So the client should be able to leave the game without anything happening for the server. So that's working. And if I quit the game over here, so my quit game button is not working. That's nice. And for the client it is working. So let's see, host quit game. We have onClicked for the server if it's true. And client sessions after that, destroy own session, quit game. So maybe if we plug in PlayerController over here. I think that should be working. So we're going to test that in a little bit at the end of the video again. We're going to dive into the player state. Okay, we're not going to dive into the player state. We're going to replace to casts node in here. So it wasn't working for quitting the game because we're casting to the menu game mode over here. And we're not actually using the menu game mode. We are using our shooter game mode. So we need to cast to our shooter game mode in here. And from here we need to get the array of connected players again. So get all connected controllers and plug it into the for each loop, but that doesn't work because it's still using the other controller references. So if you disconnect the array element, then you should be able to plug it in over here. And after that, we can plug it in over here again. So now this should work. And let me see, over here we have another cast, so let's get rid of this one as well. And for the array, so cast it to our shooter game mode and get all connected controllers. Plug this in here, that doesn't work, disconnect, and there we go. So I'm kind of thinking, so this is a shooter player controller and this is a menu controller, so this is not working, and we probably need to create the end session event on the shooter player controller as well. So if we're going to compile this, see, that's not going to work. So let's get rid of the end session over here as well. And let's go into our shooter player controller. And over here, we're going to create a custom event and call this end client session. So this is replicated to run on the owning client. And from here, we're going to call our destroy session. And the player controller, that's a reference to ourselves. So then I think we should be good to go. So we want to open our main menu in here. So let's open level and let's get our main menu map. And before we destroy the session and open the level, we want to set the variable in our game instance back to false just to be safe. So we're going to get our game instance and we're going to cast it to our shooter game instance. And we want to set our MP PauseMenu visible back to false. And plug this in over here. So that should work. And now we can go back into our PauseMenu, and over here we can actually call the new end client session. And now we should be able to get rid of the error and do the same thing over here in the other for each loop and plug it in, and there we go. Okay, sorry, that was a little bit messy, but I forgot to put it in my notes, so I had to do a little bit out the top of my head, but I think we got it fixed. So now we're going to dive into the player state. So as you remember, in the beginning when we connected to the lobby, we used a save game to get our player name into the game again. And there's actually a different way to store and transfer information, and we can use a player state for that. So now we are connected to the server, and if we actually use server travel, then we can get information from old and new player states, and that way we can make information persistent. And player states also replicate between all of the connected players, so that way it's a pretty great way to share information about players between other players. So let's set up a player state and let's see how that works. So we're going to right click and create a new blueprint class and look for a player state and select it. So let's call it our BP shooter player state. And first we need to make sure that we actually use it. So we're going to open our menu GameMode, and on the right side over here for the defaults we can assign our player state class. So over here select your BP shooter player state, and we need to do the same thing for the shooter game mode. So also open that one up, and in here also assign your player state class for the BP shooter player state. Compile and save. So we have that set up. Now if we open up our player state, there's not much in here, but we're going to create a little bit in here, not much. So let's start by adding our player profile structure. So let's create a variable, and that's our sPlayer profile. And that's the structure that we created in the beginning of the series. So the player profile. And then we can use an event in the player state to copy variables from our old to our new player state when we are using seamless travel. So if we right click and look for event copy properties, so over here it can be implemented in blueprints to move over properties from old to new player states when traveling to a new level. And what we get here is the new player state. And we can simply get information from here. So what we do is cast this to our shooter player state. Nope, doesn't really work. So cast to shooter player state. And then we can get the variable from this player state and store it on our new player state. So this gets called when we are using server travel, probably somewhere in the travel map or something, I don't know. But it's actually on the old player state, and it's using this information to populate the new player state. So we can simply set our sPlayer profile and plug it in over here. And that will make the player profile persistent as long as we are using server travel. So let's grab this variable and make sure that it's replicated. So that way, if the server sets it, then it will get updated for all the clients as well. Now, let's see. Let's go into our menu game mode. And over here, so we also assigned the player state to the menu game mode, and when we update the lobby we get all of our player profiles, and we can actually use that tiny spot over there to store our player profile on our player state. So over here we have all of the connected player controllers, and we're simply going to drag off here again, and we're going to get our player state. And this is actually a default variable that's already in here, so you don't need to create it. And as you can see by these little bubbles over here, it's a replicated variable. So the server sets this right now because we are on the game mode, but everything replicates over here. So this is going to be replicated to all the pins. So we have a player state over here, but we need to cast it to our shooter player state. And if the cast succeeds, then we're going to simply store our player profile structure on the player state. So set player profile struct, plug it in here, and make sure that we get the player profile struct over here and connect it up as well. So right now, if we connect to the lobby and all the information gets updated, we also store our player state, our player profile on our player state. And then if we travel to the map, then the information on there should transfer, and we should have all the player names accessible. So how are we going to access that information? Well, for now, let's use the HUD for this. And let's make sure that we display all of the player names that are in the game on the HUD. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time to make this look pretty, because this video is taking way too much time already. So for now, I'm simply going to get some text in here. Okay, I'm going to change the font, so I'm going to take a little bit of time. Paste it. So this is going to be a variable, and this is going to be the text player name 0. No bracket, but 0. And now let's see, this should be a variable, so let's enable it over here, and let's change it, why not, player name. And we're gonna add 4 of them, so let's duplicate them. 0, 1, 2, 3. And they are obviously not aligned in any way because we didn't use any vertical boxes or anything like that. So you can take all the time you want to make this look pretty, but as I mentioned, this video is taking quite a lot of time, so I'm just going to do it like this for now. So let me see, we're going to get into the event graph. And we're going to make sure that we actually get some information from our player state. So let's get the event construct in here. And at the beginning we have the countdown and stuff like that. So we want to make sure that we add a little delay in here. And I'm going to wait for something like 2 seconds. So then I'm going to grab all of the player names, and we need to store them in an array. So we can actually do something with them. So drag them all in here and make an array. Plug all 4 of them in here. And then we're going to promote this array to a variable. So right click, promote a variable, all player names. and that should be text, but I'm just going to leave it like this. So all player names. Then we're gonna get the borders, but I didn't add any borders, so that's fine. Let me see. So we're gonna get a for each loop in here, and we're gonna plug in all of the player names. So that's the array that we created. And then we're gonna get our shooter game state. So we didn't actually create a custom game state, but it's still in here by default, and we're gonna get back to actually using game states later. But on the game state is an array of player states, so we can get that. So if we look for get player array, this will return the array of all player states that are connected to the game. So right here we can get the length of that array, and if we subtract one of this, so do -1, so then we can compare this to the index of the array, and if the index of the array is bigger than the length of the array, we're going to get rid of the player name because there's nobody there. So greater than, and let me see if it's, oh, I'm messing this up, sorry. So okay, so the minus should be -1, and then we have the greater than, and the array element should go into the lower pin, and the output from the length should go in the upper pin. Then we can plug this into a branch, and if this is true, then we can remove the text player name from that array index. So we can simply get this array element. Oh, come on, I'm screwing things up right now. And we can remove from parent. So plug this into the true pin. So this simply removes the player name if there is no player connected. So we're checking the size of the array, and if the index is greater than the size of the array, we're going to get rid of the player name. And after that, we're actually going to access our player array. So let's copy this, get the game state and get player array, get a for each loop. So these are the actual player states that we created. So we can cast this to our shooter player state and plug it in here. And from the shooter player state, we can get the player profile. So as player profile. And from here we can get the player name. So we need to break the structure. And we can set the text of the player name. And if we match that index up to the index from the player array, then we should be good to go. So if we drag in the all player names and get a copy, plug the index over here. So then over here we can set this item's text. Oh, come. Set text. And we want to set it to this player name. And then we should be good to go. So this is pretty much all you need to do. You can access the player states from your game state, and from there you can simply access information because everything should be replicated if you set that up correctly. So then you should simply be able to get information from there. So let's see if this is working. There is one little side note. This only works when using seamless travel, so you cannot use your play-in editor to test something like this to get information from the player state, because then it will simply return nothing. So to make sure that you test it properly, you need to make sure that you test with standalone game. And I'm not even sure if I did that, but I hope I did. So let's make sure we enable seamless travel and then start the game. Excuse me. So I'm not really sure if it's working, to be honest. Yes, we did have a standalone game in here. So I probably messed up something, so let me just double check and I'll be back in a sec. So that's only a small fix, but before we dive into that, I want to open up the shooter game mode because I also forgot something in here. So we're going to add an event on logout in the game mode as well. So this is for when we're actually playing the game. So right now we need to cast to our shooter player controller. And if that one is logging out, we're going to remove it from the array again. So remove item and connect it up. And then just to make sure, I'm going to subtract one of the number expected players. We're not really using it right now, but to prevent any issues in the future, we might as well just keep it updated. So now that we have the event logout in place, we can go back to fixing the setup. So if we remove the player controller, this will also automatically update the player state array. So all of the information in there will automatically update and it will simply remove one of the player states. So a small mistake over here, as I got a little bit confused, we need to swap over these two pins. So the outcome from this subtraction needs to go in the lower pin and the array index needs to go in the upper pin, and then everything is working. So right now we can test it and we should be good. Come on, you can do it. There we go. So let's host a game and let's change the name so we can see a little bit of difference. Search for the game. And connect it up. Now let's use our second level and enable seamless travel, otherwise it's not going to work. And now start the game. So we have a little bit of a delay, that's the 2 seconds that we added. And over here we have the 2 player names on screen. And we didn't actually load any of the save games, so all of this is done with the player state. So that's how you can use that. Now the offset is not correct, but I can show you why in a little bit. So right now we can also test our quit game buttons and stuff like that. So if the host would go back to the, or let's just quit with the host, why not? And then the client returns to the main menu, so that's fine. That's working. And let me see, so for the alignment I messed up all of this, so the index 0, 3, 1, 2, and that's why I had a gap in there. So if I would actually order these correctly, then it would line up, but I'm not gonna bother because we took way too long today. So I hope everything made sense. I got a little bit tired and I'm not sure if I should have recorded this video because it got a little bit sloppy at the end. But again, I hope you learned something and I hope it made sense. I'll be back soon with more. Thanks for watching everybody. Talk to you later.